welcome to the 100th episode of Deep Drive, which has consistently been powered by Kotak Mahindra Prime. Well, before we kick off, I want to say a big thank you to our viewers, our listeners, because it's thanks to you all that we have now become, by far, India's #1 automotive podcast. And to celebrate this landmark podcast or our century, we're going to be talking about Indian heroes or the Indian companies that have really come of age. I'm Hormazd Sorabjee.
Hi, I'm Ketan Thakkar. Yes, Hormazd, the rise of Indian brands in the last half a decade has been phenomenal. Passenger vehicle makers, Mahindra and Tata Motors, they've more than doubled their share. Pre-COVID, they were about combined 12% of the Indian passenger vehicle market. Today, they've gone on to acquire about 27% of the Indian passenger vehicle market. Two-wheelers, Hero has been part of that podium for a very long period of time, and they are spreading wings globally. Commercial vehicle maker, Tata Motors number 4, knocking at number 3 with the acquisition of Iveco. Bajaj Auto, largest three-wheeler manufacturer in the world. Mahindra, largest tractor maker in the world. So clearly, Indian automotive industry has come of age and it has been a phenomenal run. And last half a decade has proven that how India as a market is critical, and Indian automotive companies are growing in weight and size across the world. And, it has been a phenomenal journey, but, the journey dates back decades. And I've been quite curious to know about how the Indian brands have done post-independence. So, Urvas, why don't you help our viewers understand?
I think, post-independence, I think we know the story. We said it before, really a closed economy, very regulated, everything controlled, capacity controlled, no investment. And, it was a complete seller's market. Just imagine waiting this for a Premier Padmini in 1982, just before Maruti came, was about 7-8 years, so crazy. But that all changed. But I think what I'd like to touch upon is who survived and who did not survive. Right. Let's talk about those that did not survive, notably Premier and Hindustan Motors. Really, these were the two, I wouldn't say icons, but the two brands people of my generation and before just grew up with. These were the only two cars you could buy. Right. So imagine from having total control of the Indian market with just these two brands, or two models actually, because they didn't have multiple models. They had the Ambassador and the Padmini, as we know, for decades, and they're just now completely gone.
Absolutely.
So I think, what happened clearly, I think, they never invested in their own products, their own technology, or they were just content living in the seller's market. Now, one could argue they didn't have access to technology. It was difficult to import. Foreign exchange was difficult. But then you look at Mahindra and Tata Motors, and clearly...
What a phenomenal story.
As you said, 27% of the market both of them have today. They were in the same boat in a way as, let's say, HM and Premier. And it's just been a phenomenal story. No one could have thought of this. Tata Motors, one has to go back to their ethos. They were the telco, Tata Engineering and Locomotive Company. So engineering was very much part of their ethos. So even when they came in the 50s, 54 with Mercedes trucks, they kind of tried to learn and acquire, let's say, R&D, know-how, right, whatever was possible at that time. So when they got into the car business, they already had a certain amount of R&D there. Premier and HM just didn't invest in R&D at all. At the most they could do is change a light or a grille and became Mark II, Mark III, Mark IV. That was a joke that it was. They really didn't bother to invest. And clearly when global competition came and the industry was delicensed, they just got swamped. They tried a bit with Contessas and 118 NEs, which are all kind of, hybrid models, hybrid in the sense one engine from Nissan, one body from Seat, and the same with, let's say, Hindustan, Isuzu engine, Vauxhall body. So it was just a mishmash of stuff which never really worked. Mahindra was a late starter, to be honest, because don't forget, Mahindra was really just a rural kind of a people mover, very crude, very basic. So Tata had a much bigger lead over Mahindra at that time. And, clearly, so Mahindra was also quite vulnerable. But I think, as we saw that they've really kind of changed the game. And I think, hats off to Mahindra from where they were and where they were now. I think for me, the to show the true pace of how the company has grown. And Mahindra, we've said this before, is in the year 2000, they none of the vehicles had front independent suspensions. Tata Motors had that. The Indica was already there. Maruti came with in 83. I mean, I'm just using this as an example to show how crude their cars were.
Right.
I mean, who could have thought that cars wouldn't have front independent suspension at that time? But it didn't have. And today, they've got some cutting edge EVs which really have changed the game altogether. So I think what I'd like to look back also, Ketan, is that, structurally, I think looking at Indian companies, I think the sense one gets is that it's all a question of survival.
I agree.
So I think either they had to survive or perish. And I think both did come to the edge at some time. I think for Mahindra, the Scorpio was really a kind of a defining moment. If that failed, they might have got swallowed up by Ford. It was the same for Tata Motors. Indica was on the edge. Ratan Tata had spoken to even GM, whether they'd like to acquire the car business. And you had all these big multinationals which had come, with big watches and their so-called fancy models, waiting in the wings. Don't forget 93 things. So not even a decade in. And they were just waiting to really pounce on the weaker Indian competition. And we saw what happened to Premier. I mean, they tried with Fiat and Pal Peugeot. It didn't really work. But I think, Ketan, looking at the way they all started, I mean, if you look at it, 40 years of isolation, or let's say 30 years of isolation, and then suddenly an open kind of, let's say, market. I think the way everyone wanted to do it was joint ventures and get the technology. But I think clearly a lot of them realized the joint ventures weren't going to work. And I think, let's talk on the two-wheeler companies as well. Absolutely. They all started off with joint ventures.
Absolutely.
TVS, Suzuki, Kawasaki, Bajaj, Hero, Honda, which really was, a very kind of iconic joint venture, which is still, everyone thinks of it as a Hero Honda, with the CD100. So, but again, the two-wheeler guys, I think we had the scale. And between the two-wheeler and the four-wheeler, I think the two-wheelers were a little bit more, let's say, I wouldn't say independent, but they could stand on their own 2 feet much quicker than the four-wheeler guys, possibly because of the scale.
Absolutely. I think the way all these ventures started, they knew that technology was a big missing piece in their arsenal, and they knew that they needed to partner global giants in order to understand the skill sets and the technology, and hence we saw two different eras of two-wheelers. If you were to see, Hormazd, one was an era wherein they held each other's hand and they established themselves in the market. Hero, Honda, Bajaj, Kawasaki, TVS, Suzuki. So, I mean, that was the first decade. And as the Indian market grew, as the scale started emerging bigger, we started seeing the Indian promoters actually becoming a lot more bolder. And we knew that it was only a matter of time when all these Indian promoters will eventually have their own independent entity. And we saw what has happened. The era of 2000 to 2010 is when we actually started seeing an independent two-wheeler brands emerging. And in the last decade, Hormazd, a lot of effort was put in to globalize the Indian brands. And in 2025,
amazing.
Are amongst
Bajaj, KTM.
It's phenomenal.
TVS with Norton.
It's phenomenal. I mean, and what is phenomenal is that, today they are seen as a credible brand. Today they are seen as a brand which can actually capture a large part of the world, because world over motorcycles and two-wheelers are becoming smaller. So it has been a phenomenal journey for the two-wheeler guys, and they've been actually a flag bearer of globalization of.
And what's interesting is, unlike the four-wheeler segment, the two-wheeler companies are largely promoter driven. I mean, there's no real promoter driven four-wheeler company. I mean, you take Mahindra and Tata. I mean, these two, which which are really Indian, run by professionals.
Absolutely.
Totally.
No, I mean,
and not to say that the two-wheeler guys aren't, but it's a very promoter driven and promoter led organizations.
I mean, you listen to each one of them, Hormazd, and you have spoken to almost all of them, the passion with which they talk, and you do see them very personally involved into day-to-day affairs. We've seen it across promoters, right from Mr. Munjal, Rajiv Bajaj, Rahul Bajaj, Mr. Venu, Sudarshan now, Siddharth Lal. I mean, you listen to him and the passion just is very infectious to see. And we've seen that, that has played an important role in how the brands have evolved. And the most important part is that beyond technology, all all of them are brand custodians. For them, the brand matters a lot. And that is how we've seen the Indian brands becoming bigger globally. And even as technology has evolved with time, we are in line with what we see with the global brands. But I think the brand story is a very creditable story that we've seen the two-wheeler industry actually evolving into.
Absolutely. And I think, again, looking at the four-wheeler side, as I said earlier, I think talking all about survival.
Yeah.
So, they know that they have to make it work.
Absolutely.
They may have one or two bad years, but they'll figure it out and they'll just make it work.
Absolutely.
Whereas with a global brand, it's a very on-off thing.
Absolutely.
So where does India fit in? There's a change at the top. India not so important, then it becomes important again.
True.
So they come in. They are here, but they kind of approach the Indian market in fits and starts.
Absolutely.
We've seen that throughout. Like Renault invested a lot, then very quiet. Now again investing a lot. Yeah, we've seen spells. So I think that is where the Indian companies have really kind of let's say it's been, I wouldn't just say survival. I think they've realized that. This is an industry or a market only they understand better than anyone else, and they are playing to their strengths. And let's say they are sidestepping, I would even say, some of their weaknesses, which is that absolute level of global engineering which a lot of the global players have.
Absolutely.
I mean, we've seen that. I mean, honestly, we are repeating ourselves. We've said this before. But I think the way the Indian companies tailor their products for the Indian customer, I don't think anyone does that.
Absolutely. In fact, Hormazd, if I could, get you to share some views about Mr. Mahindra and Mr. Tata. I remember that first crash test facility in India was with Tata Motors.
Yeah.
I remember that it was Mr. Mahindra who took a bold call of going on his own with the automotive venture rather than partnering with Ford in 1996. So and plus, both these were very young during their ventures into the car business, and how both Mr. Mahindra and Mr. Tata have played a very important role in defining how individual brands are going to evolve in the Indian market.
No, I think again, it's all down to the leadership, and that's, I think, what we need to talk about again is leadership, which. We've seen that any company, to be honest, leadership is key. Yeah. And that's across. Yeah. It's not only global or Indian. And I think with the Indian companies, clearly you sometimes get the best talent because you realize you can make decisions. You have autonomy.
Yes.
So I think even in Mr. Tata's case, I mean, look at what Tata Motors did. I mean, they acquired JLR.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Which was amazing. I think also, Ketan, sidestepping before you get to this, I mean, Indian companies acquiring global brands as well.
Phenomenal.
JLR, they did, Mahindra did SsangYong, that didn't really quite work out, but there was an appetite to do that.
Absolutely.
Mahindra was in the race to get JLR,
yes.
But, I think they just didn't have the kind of, let's say, depth of, let's say, capital or resource to kind of, let's say, pull it through if there was a downturn, and there was a tricky period after, JLR was taken over by Tata Motors, which Tata Motors, just given the kind of the size it was, or the Tata group, it could really tide them through, the tough period.
Absolutely.
Which Mahindra might have collapsed if they, if they had bought JLR at that time. So really very astute kind of decisions taken at that time. And in hindsight, they were actually superb decisions.
It just shows the confidence with which Indian brands are moving about their future. You spoke of Tata, JLR, Mahindra acquiring SsangYong, Bajaj acquiring KTM, Bajaj getting into this win-win partnership with KTM's promoter, Stephen Pierer, and not really wanting to step into each other's shoes. But, it was a win-win partnership where there was so much of confidence between each promoters that they were willing to have just a 2% public hold, and with both the promoters holding the majority share almost equal. And, you wanted to ensure that there was win-win for everyone, but there was that confidence that, you could go out there, you could acquire international brands, and you could have a say in the international market. With time, we've seen now Tata Motors commercial vehicle business acquiring Iveco, a phenomenal TVS Motor acquiring Norton.
Yeah, but I would have to say, not all of them fire. Clearly, JLR has worked. Again, now JLR has had its own issues. SsangYong didn't quite work. They had one good year, but then after that, it was just kept bleeding money. KTM, a challenge again for Bajaj right now. I mean, TVS has done Norton again, a big bet. So it's not so much whether they work or don't, but the fact that Indian companies have the appetite to go and acquire. And I think that is phenomenal, which has been unheard of before.
Absolutely.
So again, I think what I'd like to maybe focus on is, I think looking at the market and obviously focusing on the passenger car segment. The two real Indian heroes are Tata Motors and Mahindra over here. Fascinating journeys. I think, as I said, Tata Motors are much earlier, let's say, starter in this space. It had the resources much bigger than Mahindra was. I remember, Keshav Mahindra saying that, Tata Motors, he always saw as the bigger brother.
Right.
And he used to tell Ratan Tata that, so clearly, there was a lot of, I think what was really great, that old school kind of camaraderie that was there. That was really fantastic. So I think, honestly, what's really stood apart is that they have created segments. I mean, each one of them. I think Tata Motors really pioneered in that, starting with, let's say, the Sierra.
Yeah.
Very unreliable vehicle at that time, but, 3-door with really kind of unique, revolutionary styling at that time. Really didn't sell in too many numbers. I think at that time, it was seen as what even Ratan Tata said were bridge products from trucks to cars. And so it was a learning experience, but there was nothing like it. Safari also the first of its kind, quite revolutionary in that respect. Indigo.
First diesel, right? The first diesel also came from Tata's first diesel car.
Well, the first diesel car, I mean, if you take a car as in terms of Sierra, it is a diesel car. I mean, Mahindra, everyone was on diesel at that time in the SUV space or the UV space or the people mover space. There were no SUVs really. I would say the Sierra was the first of them. And, Safari also in 98, again, a proper SUV and really phenomenal in terms of styling and all. I think that bugbear has always been quality and reliability, which really was an issue with the early cars. And again, so I think where Tata Motors has really led has been on design.
Yeah.
And clearly we've seen that manifest. And again, to me, the current Sierra also, in terms of design, I think it really is a really phenomenal standard right now. So the sense of proportion and, the Tata way of slightly understated, but yet very elegant and, looking great. They've done that with a lot of their cars. And again, I think a big innovation was the compact sedan.
Absolutely.
I mean, that sub 4 meter was meant for hatchbacks, but then it became for, let's say, compact sedans, and then everything became compact. Everything under every body style under sub 4 meters. We had the SUV, which actually, again, to give credit, do you know who started the compact, who pioneered the compact SUV segment? It wasn't Ford with the EcoSport. It was Premier with the Rio. I mean, yes, total flop, but it was an Indian company that pioneered that. So I think the point I'm trying to make is that, a lot of, let's say, Indian companies can visualize much quicker and much faster than the global OEMs where there is an opportunity.
Absolutely.
And go in there. Now, they may not execute it to the best that should have been done, but, clearly they get in there first.
Absolutely.
And I think even Mahindra, let's talk about them. They've also pioneered some segments in which they're the only ones there.
There's nothing like Bolero in the market.
There's nothing like Bolero in the market.
Nothing like Scorpio. There's nothing like Thar.
Absolutely. Nothing like Thar.
Probably
like Thar Rock.
Some people can claim something like 700 or 7XO.
No, 700 is more generic, more mainstream.
But majority of their portfolio is something that it's one of its kind.
That's right.
Eye-catching design.
Absolutely. And Tata's always traditionally had, let's say, very, very strong engineering behind them. So that's why I think that's best manifested, I would say, when you saw the Sumo, what it was at that time compared to something like an Armada.
Yeah.
But frankly, Ketan, I think it's flipped now. I think what Mahindra has achieved is absolutely phenomenal from where they've gone. And, when it comes to powertrain, I think you can see between the two, Mahindra still has the edge on powertrain. If you look at their portfolio, Tata Motors fighting back with a 1.5 petrol, which is good in the Sierra, even better in the Harrier and Safari. It feels much better over there, but really not quite there with Mahindra yet. So they have some catching up to do. And that's why I think, for me, really, I think between the two, right now, Mahindra definitely has the edge in a lot of ways. I think, let's look at how they've taken made their brand premium, Ketan. I think for me, that is phenomenal.
Yeah.
I mean, even Tata has done that to a certain extent with the Harrier and Safari. But the way Mahindra has done it,
The only brand, Hormazd, that has succeeded in bringing in the mainstream buyers there.
absolutely. In fact, they've gone ahead of even, let's say, Hyundai in certain ways.
Absolutely.
And if you do the numbers, you take 7XO numbers, you take 30% of Scorpio N numbers, you take really the top end of Thar Rocks. I'm talking about the plus 20 lakh ex-showroom cost.
Yeah.
30% of all Mahindras today are above 20 lakhs.
Now that's phenomenal.
I think that is absolutely phenomenal. I think that's really shows the kind of, let's say, strength of the brand and from where to where it's come. I mean, it was not long ago that Mahindra launched the Alturas, which decent product. I mean, it was a SsangYong, so it was quite well made, well appointed, very refined.
Yeah.
But it just bombed completely. I think it was because Mahindra couldn't really, have that brand
price
at that time.
Yeah.
I think even Harrier and Safari have really gone up. I think Harrier now getting good numbers with the EV as well.
Yeah.
Not really to the extent Mahindra has with a combination of their 7XO and their Born EVs.
Yeah.
I think even the Born EVs, okay, not as much as Mahindra expected it.
Yeah.
I think they were hoping for about 5,000 a month, so not quite there. But if you just look at it,
Yeah.
they're number 3.
Yeah. In the EV space.
In the EV space with cars which are, 20 lakhs plus.
No, I think Hormazd, their ability to read the market and their ability to take decisions quickly. And we've spoken about that in the past as to how decisions are taken over WhatsApp at Mahindra and Mahindra. I think they've evolved with the needs of the Indian market so quickly. Design, leading from the front, safety,
Yeah.
the 5-star rating. Tata Motors took it on its own in 2017 with Nexon.
And you're right. And in safety, to be honest, I mean, they kind of overhyped it to me. And I think we've said this before.
Yeah.
I don't think the 5-star rating is, the be all and end all of safety. But they used it as a marketing tool.
Absolutely, they did.
And they milked it really well. And, Tata Motors did that. Mahindra followed.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, now having a 5-star rating has become hygiene because everyone's following them.
Absolutely.
And joined the game. But they were the pioneers in really putting that 5-star rating into people's minds right in the from the beginning.
To me, Hormazd, I think from being a follower, now they become the benchmark in the market. Be it design, be it safety, be it tech, be it features, be it electrification. I think on all fronts, if you were to look at the rise of both these brands, they've really read the Indian market very well and they've tailored the product to the requirement of the Indian market. And what has surprised many in the industry is the pricing at which these models are getting launched.
That's right. But I want to stop you there. They've done all that, but yet they don't quite have that finesse.
I agree, Hormazd.
Or the depth of engineering of their global peer. They're closing the gap.
Yeah, they are.
It's not quite there. I mean, if you see both vehicles, especially the Mahindras, the EVs, I'd call them, ergonomically seriously flawed. The kind of simple ergonomics in there would not be accepted in Europe. You take a Hyundai, much cleaner interfaces, much easier to use, more sorted, everything works. But and I mean, especially the ergonomics in a lot of the Mahindras going through all the multiple function screens, it's not intuitive at all. But the point is, I think what Mahindra has realized is that Indians don't mind compromising on that last 3-4%, which sometimes Japanese and European OEMs obsess over too much.
Right.
They don't even let that go, but Mahindras don't mind letting that go because frankly, they don't yet have that level of experience. You need multiple model life cycles to keep improving. I mean, they've improved phenomenally.
It's a story of last 3 decades only.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I mean, you see the 7XO, the suspension is actually world class. What they have done on the 7XO. That Da Vinci suspension, what they call, is marketing term, but just the what they've done over there, it's really transformed the handling of the car. So they are learning. But again, I think what they've realized is that what they don't have in that last bit of finesse, they overcompensate and really pack their car with features to just wow the customer.
It's phenomenal. It's phenomenal.
And that's really been the success of Indian OEMs. Yeah.
You know, it's funny. Almost many a time your friend or a family member come to you and ask you that should I buy a Tata or should I buy a Mahindra? You tend to give them that confidence that cars have come of their age and they are absolute value. But still, some of them do give us that feedback that I would rather wait for another 6 months to see whether those glitches emerge in the first lot of production.
That's right.
And once the first few months, several months of batch of production is addressed and the glitches are addressed, that is when I will go ahead and buy. And there are some people who are willing to wait, but there are some who actually go on to the competition model. So, but they've grown significantly.
And I think also what's happened, Ketan, is just see the way their volumes have increased. Frankly, it stretched the system to the max.
You're not used to it, yeah.
Tata Motors, for example, I think a lot of service issues have happened, and it's all over the internet.
Yeah.
Because they've not been able to cope with that volume.
I agree.
Especially when they start coming for service. So, I think it's not long. I think just before COVID, they're about 12, 13,000.
Absolutely.
Now,
55, 60,000.
55, 60,000.
Last month, they did about 70,000.
Unbelievable. Yeah. So I think, it's just phenomenal over there. So, but really with that kind of explosion in volume, I think there are cracks in the system. I think Mahindra, the same thing. I think also, companies like Mahindra, they want to get to market really as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
So let's say on the
time is of essence.
Yeah, time is of essence. So I think with the 9E, there were serious software glitches. Everything was the updates were being done at the dealer level, where very often there wasn't 5G connectivity.
Right.
So they couldn't be updated. So I think now let's say Japanese company or even Maruti Suzuki, they delayed their e-Vitara for such a long time. But I mean, the buzz around the e-Vitara, it's we don't know now. The only way they can sell it is at a super competitive pricing.
Right.
Just imagine that. Maruti can't do premium.
Right.
And Maruti Suzuki can't do premium, whereas Mahindra can do it with full confidence right now.
Absolutely.
So the only way the e-Vitara will either succeed or die is on the price.
Absolutely.
Because as a product also pretty underwhelming. Really doesn't have that wow factor. And that's really what is really surprising, Ketan. I think where the global companies also,
miss out
on is that they have to be globally aligned with other markets as well.
Absolutely.
Our Indian companies don't have that issue at all. Yeah.
Absolutely. And which is where the speed and agility comes in. And then we've often said that many of the multinational corporations, if they're going through difficult times globally, the impact is very visible in India because all of a sudden the focus just goes away. The life cycles languish. The products are not coming. The next phase of investment is a question mark. And then we start having this question mark whether the brand is going to succeed in the Indian market or no. Whereas Indian brands, this is the home market and this is where they have to do their best and this is where they give their best. And we see some of the best products and best equipped models, best designs on all fronts.
Yeah, they don't have an international market to, kind of bail them out, which we'll come to in a bit. But it's either you got to do it at home or you can't do it at all.
And which is where, you're always looking for that one expat who actually believes in India. And you're always, be it at the European brand or it's a different story for Maruti Suzuki and Hyundai, but you still question, for long we question that even at Toyota, what's really happening. Now there's an alignment that has happened because of the global alliance with Suzuki, but then you question at Nissan, you question at Honda as to what is the role of India, where exactly will India figure in their global scheme of things in the future. And it's always linked to the fortunes in the global market. Nissan has had to face really difficult times and India suffered. Honda kind of restructured, pivoted to different technologies. First it was EVs, then hybrid. Now it is multi-powertrain. What happened to India? We saw almost 4 or 5 years of no action at all.
That's right.
So I think whenever we've seen issues globally, India has suffered, and which is the biggest edge that Indian brands have, that sharply focused on the Indian market, product tailored for the Indian market, right price to the Indian market, and now they dare to go even global, Hormazd.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I think, Ketan, what we need to talk about also is leadership, because I think clearly I've always said, it's not machines that make products, it's the people that make the products, behind them. And I think we've seen that at Tata Motors also. I think you can't take away what Ratan Tata did. He kind of built a car company almost single-handedly with the IndyCar.
Yeah, phenomenal.
Otherwise, if he wasn't there, company might have continued making trucks. Now, one could argue that would have been a more profitable thing to do, but without a car company, that was the springboard for, going and acquiring a Jaguar Land Rover.
Yeah.
So these were very kind of, let's say, decisive actions taken by strong leaders at that time. And I think after Ratan Tata, of course, he was larger than life. I think Cyrus Mistry shouldn't take away from what he did, during his period, a very intense period of product development, and we are still seeing
strong foundation was laid.
Yeah, and we're still seeing these products. Nexon, for example, 22,000, unbelievable last month. So it just goes to show, that the kind of, let's say, thought given at that time is now paying off over there. These are all Cyrus Mistry products. I think with Mr. Chandrasekaran on the EV side, I mean, he bet on the EVs. He literally kind of, took it as a personal challenge. And I think in an interview with him, Gunter had told him, it'll take about 4 years. He said, I want it in 1.
Yeah.
So he pushed that. Again, Gunter, I think, again, strong, super leader. And now I think we've seen with Sailesh also, we've got some really strong leadership.
Absolutely.
But obviously, I think it's really getting the right people, even lower down.
Yeah.
That's, I think, where, let's say, product guys have to be very, very strong. And honestly, that leads me to Mahindra, which I think today, in terms of, it's a dream team right now.
I agree with you.
I don't think any other company has such a dream team. You got Anisha at the top, who understands everything, knows everything, but gives the autonomy to Rajesh, who I think today has emerged as one of the best CEOs we've seen.
Marketing maverick, I would say.
Absolutely. Marketing genius, just takes the calls and, backed by another engineering genius called Velu, who is just absolutely phenomenal. I think today it's quite understood that, Velu is really the superstar in the engineering world. And they've got Pratap Bose also.
Yes.
So really a phenomenal team over there, between Pratap, Velu, Rajesh, and obviously Anish at the top. So I think this is really what is working in their favor, and I think we are seeing the results with that.
And credit to Mr. Mahindra and Dr. Goenka as well, who actually laid the foundation. I think MRV is like the backbone, which was mooted under.
I wanted to get back to that. I think if you see how it was, I think there was a period you had Anand. And you can't take away from what Dr. Goenka did, because he really laid the background. Absolutely. And to be honest, today, a lot of the products are, from his legacy.
Absolutely.
The ICE products, for example, they're obviously a lot of what he's done.
Right.
They were, kind of almost signed off what he did. XUV 700 was his. You've got a 7XO, which is really a facelift of that. One of the most successful products.
Thar Rocks.
Thar and Thar Rocks again. Scorpio again. So, but obviously, with Rajesh, he's taken those products and taken it to the next level. But, you can't take away what Pawan's contribution has been. So I think Mahindra for me has been a story of just phenomenal leadership for, the last, let's say, 2 decades, I would say.
And then the leadership is where the challenge with the MNCs also lies, isn't it, Hormazd? And we've spoken about it in the past. When we have CEOs rolling over every 3 years, then there's a sense of discontinuity. And if it is disrupted with global challenges, then it really affects the local brands, and which is where we've seen Tarun Garg being made as the MD of Hyundai Motor India. So a right step in a right direction. We've seen it with Volkswagen Group as well.
Right.
Piyush Arora now the Indian MD steering the ship. So over time, we've seen the MNCs aligning to the local management because instead of just being executors, now they are strategizing. So which is one positive change that we have seen. And Mr. Bhargav has been there at the top while the Japanese continue to execute. But Mr. Bhargav's blessings has always been
absolutely
there.
I think if Maruti gets the CAFE regulations as to the way they want, it'll all be Mr. Bhargav's lobbying at age 90 plus, which is phenomenal.
Which is phenomenal. So, I mean, we've seen that at the end of the day, you need strong leaders. And if there are local leaders, definitely it has a very strong, visible impact on how the strategy is curated, and strategy curated for the Indian market and Indian buyers, Hormazd.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, Indian companies, let's say Indians just know the Indian customer, the industry just better than anyone else. So I think really very difficult to fight with them. But I think the next frontier, Ketan, really is going global in that sense. I think, as we've said earlier, the one thing which Indian companies haven't done is really gone beyond the domestic markets and become global. I mean, let's face it, the Chinese, which started much later than us, they've just kind of raced ahead of what we've done.
It's phenomenal.
And I think in a way, the protection we have from, let's say, Chinese companies coming in and investing in here, I don't know how Indian companies would have reacted. I'm sure they would have figured it out, because we've seen that every time competition comes and, we kind of write the epitaph of a lot of Indian companies, they become even stronger.
Absolutely.
So I think maybe that would have been the good thing to do. It would have, forced them to raise their game even more, to be more global in their outreach. So I think that's the next step, which I think they need to do. And that's where both Tata and Mahindra are very, very far behind. They're just
I agree with you,
not
Hormazd.
global anywhere.
I agree with you, Hormazd. I think it's been in the making for a while. I mean, you do check with the management about their globalization plan. Avinya, when it was mooted and when it was showcased in 2022, that was supposed to be Tata Motors' gateway into European region. When Mahindra and Mahindra showcased their first BEVs, they told us that, now with the EVs, the international markets open up. But clearly, the way the Chinese brands are going about in the international market,
Exactly. They've just taken 5% of the European market, so it's so I think the smart thing to do is, look, you can't take the Chinese head on right now. We're not ready for it.
Yeah, I agree with
I
you.
think, companies like Mahindra, even Tata are doing South Africa, a good place to start, I think that's
Australia.
And now Australia.
Yeah.
And I think 3X are doing very well in Australia
Yeah.
for Mahindra. So I think that really becomes a litmus test, because Australia, much smaller market, but with, let's say, European sensibilities in that sense, what people want. So I think learning from there could be a way to get into Europe. I think Europe will take some time,
I agree.
clearly, and if at all, looking at, let's say, regions of Europe which really are not that competitive. Yeah.
So Hormazd focus all these years have been to look at India-like market, emerging markets, Africa, Latin America. But the portfolio, if you were to see what we had a decade back, was not really aligned to the global needs and whatever international MNC brands would have catered to these overseas markets. But now with the portfolio being sorted out, the existing Mahindra and Tata products are actually well suited for some of these emerging markets, given the fact that they are competing with those MNCs here head on, and probably better than them in many regards. So that is what has given them confidence to cater to India-like market, emerging markets. Yes, the next frontier will be the evolved markets, but like you mentioned, I think it is going to be slow and steady. You would rather go put up a base and make it like a decade-long exercise to build the brand, rather than wanting to go there and get volumes, because it's a highly evolved market, very demanding, matured buyers, and any goof up or any mistake there will cost both these brands heavily, and they're very well aware of it. And hence, it's going to be a calibrated approach in the evolved market.
Yeah.
But what we've seen with Indonesia of late,
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that's a great thing. I mean, getting into 26, clearly, I think massive orders over there.
shocking, Hormazd. I mean, Mahindra did about 35,000 exports last calendar year, and with the Indonesia order of 35,000, just immediately doubled.
Yeah.
If that was not enough, just a week later, we heard from Tata Motors. They've got an order of 70,000 trucks. So yes, it's commercial vehicle, pickup truck, but clearly there are certain segments of the market where Indians have proven that they are very competitive.
Right. Absolutely.
And they're finding resonance. So it is.
And I think the two-wheeler guys are just exporting more and more. I mean, that is
It's phenomenal, Hormazd. I think for Bajaj Auto, almost 40 to 50% of its revenue comes from export.
Yeah.
Phenomenal exports of three-wheelers happening to Africa. In fact, their two-wheelers are seen as a tool of last-mile mobility in many of the markets. In top 20 or 30 of the markets, Bajaj is either number one or number two. TVS is coming very close there. In fact, they are edging ahead of Chinese in the African and Latin American market. Royal Enfield is knocking at the evolved market store. So, I mean, two-wheeler, if you were to ask me, Hormazd, has been the flag bearer of Indian automotive exports.
They've had the scale. They're more independent. They've been doing their R&D longer. I think, more, let's say, focused on it. So
they've been bolder. They dared to go, and with the technology now they're getting from their alliance partners. Now with KTM, merging into Bajaj, with Norton's and TVS coming in together.
BMW is also there.
BMW is also there. So I think on the tech front, they are evolving. On the cost front, they are evolving. They are a lot more bolder. They're daring to go and explore new frontiers. So I think if the last century we've seen eras of American Americans, the Germans, the Japanese, the Koreans. Now we're talking about Chinese. Sometimes, I romantically feel that, probably with the scale that we are reaching, I think it's going to be the era of Indians probably in the next decade.
I think so. And I think looking at that, Ketan, just looking at the way the capacities are building up, of course, you have Maruti Suzuki right at the top. I think they'll be unshakable for a while.
Yeah.
Because honestly, they know scale, they know volume better than anything else. But, that's not all. I mean, if you see, for me, Maruti Suzuki, they've really lost a lot of sheen of the brand, which the Indian companies have grabbed. And a classic example is their inability to sell premium. And the way they are pushing the Victoris, discounting it heavily, just to show that, they can push, get into that space of SUVs. Not an easy sell for them.
Absolutely.
Their center of gravity is much, much lower. Brezza, Francs, thereabout, and the Desire, which is sold in the fleet segment. So really not very desirable from a long-term point of view, or even from a profitability point of view. But Ketan, let's talk about the future. Let's talk about 2026.
Yeah.
Sense I get is Tata Motors, has taken full advantage of the GST cut from 28 to 18 with their sub-4 meter models. Punch and Nexon just going through the roof right now.
Insane.
Do you think it could be the number 2 and
Looks like Hormazd. I think the production plans that they're giving out to vendors, it actually shocks me. They're talking about sustaining with that 75,000 units per month. I really do not know whether market has that much of appetite. Yes, Sierra is definitely going to give them that incremental volumes, but 75,000 units a month, even if they were to do 60, we are talking about 7.5 lakh units. Clearly, Mahindra on the other hand caters to the different end of the market, while Tata Motors has a lot more compact cars, compact EVs, whereas Mahindra caters to the to the top end of the market. So even Mahindra's aspirations are to do about 70,000 units a month.
Absolutely, and in terms of revenue, they're at a different level altogether, isn't it?
They're already number one EV in terms of revenue. They're already number one in terms of the SUV revenue.
Yeah,
and then the premiumization story that you spoke of, they're clearly Mahindra leading the show there. So
and I think all this has led to being able to charge a premium. It shows on the bottom line. I think 10% margin, which is unheard of. It's just phenomenal.
Absolutely. And if you were to look at those margins immediately after COVID, both Tatas and Mahindras were really low in terms of margins. And it has been a phenomenal story of not only volumes, revenues, profitability, and on top of that, they're adding more plants, more capacities, and really looking at that 1 million target.
That's right.
And it's going to be, it's not going to be easy. I mean, Hyundai also is trying. Maruti also wants to make a comeback. So it's going to be, in fact, I would want to ask you, Hormazd, who do you think will be the creditable challenger to both these brands? Would you consider MG, Hyundai, Toyota?
I think MG could be, to be honest. And again, let's bring the Indian angle in it, because we're talking about, let's say have Indians come of age. I think with the Jindals coming in there, clearly that could be a game changer. I think only thing going against them is they don't quite know the nuances of the automotive industry. There'll be a lot of learning, a steep learning curve.
Yeah.
Do they have the right people? Do they have right professionals? All remains to be seen. No real, let's say, heroes like the way, let's say, Mahindra has,
Right.
in the leadership.
This is JSW Motor.
Yeah, JSW Motor. And, even with MG, I think, obviously they've got many more products coming.
Right.
I'm talking about JSW, which is obviously going to increase its stake in JSW MG, is going to have JSW Motors. So, point is JSW as an automotive group, I would say a bit of a dark horse over there, because clearly they are banking a lot on Chinese products and Chinese technology, which frankly, with new energy vehicles and future vehicles, that's the place to look at.
Absolutely.
Again, a lot of geopolitics can put a spoke in the wheel. Will technology be easily transferred? That all remains to be seen. Always a bit of a doubt. Unlike the Indians, which have their own now strong and indigenous R&D. Indians, what I meant is, Tata and Mahindra, which have their strong R&D. But again, JSW started on its journey.
Yeah.
I think it's a smart play, because clearly, you're going to the best. But will that best share the technology with you quite easily? That remains to be seen.
Absolutely.
But I think clearly, again, a classic example of, let's say, Indian promoters going out and trying to make something big again in the auto industry.
Yeah, bold call. I think MG, with what they've done with Windsor, the number one selling EV, betting on plug-in hybrids, they will be taking on the Mahindra 7XO with the new Starlight. The Gloucester takes on the Fortuner.
You've got the Jetur T2 from JSW.
JSW Motor,
Yeah.
that's
So I
okay.
think, there is competition over there.
Right.
Really.
Interesting. And then from the existing players, how do you see Hyundai, Toyota challenging both these brands?
I think Hyundai, I mean, obviously, we keep saying the Creta will be under threat, but the Creta still, continues to do well. New Creta will come from Hyundai. It'll all come with a hybrid. I think hybrid is going to be the new tech, which everyone is getting into. But I think Ketan, again, if you look at it, the Indian companies, they are kind of really getting more and more entrenched into this market, just putting their tentacles everywhere, looking at different technologies. I mean, take company like Tata Motors, what they've done with CNG also.
Yeah. Innovative.
Twin tank, and made CNG cool, as cool as it can be. Now, this is just not done anywhere else.
Absolutely.
So I think, really hats off to all our companies of finding niches, to where they can find, different volumes. And again, Tata, we didn't talk about it, but Ace. Another innovation, wasn't it?
Absolutely. In a three-wheeler market, they brought in something and completely changed the landscape of the Indian small commercial vehicle space. And with time, they continue to do that. I think even while the last category creation did not do all that well, the coupe with the curve, but at least there was that sense of boldness, and they did try something new in the Indian market to have some kind of a differentiator in that Creta space, as we call it.
Right.
So I think on the powertrain front as well, Tatas have done a phenomenal job, and very quietly both Mahindra and Tatas are working on range extenders, as we know. So exactly, the tide were to move in favor of the hybrids. The Indians are getting ready, probably not as good as the Japanese, Chinese, or the Koreans. But at least, like you said, they have their tentacles everywhere, and they are preparing for the future. And the speed and agility is what they have by their side, and the strong face from the Indian management.
Right. But I think, it all comes with a risk of really stretching yourselves and spreading yourselves too thin, Let's be honest, at the end of the day, these are not global companies with global resources, global markets to cater to, and global scale.
Yeah.
So
that is where the Indian brands face challenge.
That is where they face challenge. So they really have to pick their fights or pick their wins smartly, which I think they do brilliantly.
I agree.
Go for the low-hanging fruit. But even so, they will have to increase their pace of product development. Now, looking at, let's say, Tata Motors, I think after Sierra, you have Avenia, but nothing much after that. Maybe you'll have some derivatives on Sierra. You've got a new platform.
Right.
So what I'm seeing is there'll just be derivatives of new cars. So clearly, they now need to kind of go to the next level, which is an all-new architecture again. That's where I think Mahindra has a bit of a lead, because the new architecture they've talked about coming out in 27.
Future-proof themselves for the next half a decade.
They've future-proofed themselves. Yeah, exactly. But then again, capacities need to be installed. I think Tata had focused on capacities. Brilliant idea taking the Sanand plant
from Ford,
because not only did they get a brand new state-of-the-art plant, they got a culture. And clearly the quality coming out of Sanand is better than other places. I think I've said this before. Dealers want Nexon. The Nexon is made in Ranjangaon and Sanand, and the dealer said Sanand wali gaadi chahiye.
Right.
Which clearly is because the quality is perceptibly better coming out of Sanand. I'm sure they'll try and implement that back in Ranjangaon. But I think, again, it's a question of product development, capacity, and just the ability to invest. But I think today, the way capital markets are going, I think they're managing to do that, isn't it?
Absolutely. They were the only ones to kind of raise money from private equity players, and I was shocked at that small volume that Tata Motors and Mahindra both were able to raise money at a valuation of over 9 billion. Mahindra a little bit higher than Tata's.
Right.
It was quite crazy to see that, but clearly there is that green money going around, and Indian brands showing confidence to the investors that their ICE business is doing well, so EV business will also do well. So I think they are now flushed with funds, making money, bottom line improving, capacities in place. Really a runway has been set for an accelerated growth. Mahindra has been doing mid-teens growth. That's what they say every financial year. Even next year, I assume that will be the kind of growth that we are seeing. So outpacing the mainstream market, driving the change in the market, right? A phenomenal journey.
But I think the one area where, between the two, Tata Motors and Mahindra, where Tata has a definite edge and is very comfortable, is cafe targets.
Yes.
Mahindra, bulk of its portfolio, 80+% is diesel.
Yeah.
They'll need a lot of EVs
to
compensate to meet the CAFE targets.
I agree.
Especially with CAFE 3. So I think really that is where they have a challenge.
I agree.
And really it depends on, let's say, The number given to EVs is right now, I believe it's 40 grams,
Yes.
per se, because obviously EVs, they have some level of emission.
Right.
If that comes down, they'll have, let's say, more breathing space. So I think Mahindra still, that is one challenge which they still have. They need to kind of address that.
I agree with this.
So clearly 9S really, rocking right now, I think. But will it come at the expense of the 9E? That's also likely. And so really they've got to get, let's say, more EV numbers out there. But I think, if you look at it, number 3 by a country mile, and, number 4 is very distant, which is VinFast, which is, let's say,
400 units.
exactly, almost just 10-15% of what they're doing. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's just been an amazing way so they might have to, I think maybe by 27, you'll have smaller EVs, which they will address. So I think everyone's got this number. And don't forget, it starts in 27. You've got to get your number by the end of March 28.
Right.
So they still have, some time as well. So I think clearly the NU platform will be their way to address the cafe targets.
Absolutely. And what has gone in Tata's favor is the high EV share and of course the CNG share. A stage where Mahindra does not have presence as well. So
That's right, yeah.
And plus Tatas have smaller vehicles. So the core is very different.
And I think it's because these smaller vehicles, I think, Tata have that benefit of volume as well, because I think this year they're going to be doing some crazy numbers.
Now, interesting, Hormazd. I mean, just a little segue into cafe. There is a way you can actually pool the credits. So eventually that may be a way out. That eventually these carbon credits is going to be worth in gold. All these automakers, they are emitting, so the emission becomes a very critical factor, and carbon credit is how it is going to be determining where the bottom line is going to be arriving at. So I think in future, once the cafe score is finalized, the carbon credits will come into play. One is allowed to pool in those carbon credits. So it's going to be interesting in the future how that will play a very tactical role for each individual vehicle maker.
Well, Ketan, I think we've said a lot. It's been a pretty long podcast, but so much to say. But I think, I'd like to wrap it up by what you said. You had the age of the Japanese, you had the age of the Koreans, and now this is the age of the Indian players. Really, Indian companies have come of age, and I think from here they can only get stronger. So do hope you've enjoyed watching this episode, our 100th episode. And once again, thank you so much for making us India's #1 automotive podcast. And to make sure you don't miss any of our future episodes, click on the bell icon to stay notified. And you can also catch us on our other podcast platforms, which is Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks for watching. See you again, same time next week.